Hello and welcome to another PC build. So today I'm going to be building a £900 PC using the parts you can see in front of me. So this is going to be another full build guide. So I'm going to be running through everything from start to finish, from putting all the parts together, turning the PC on and installing Windows and any other drivers you're going to need to get your PC up and running. So if you've never built a PC before, you've come to the right place. I'm going to walk you through everything step by step. So before we get on to the build, I want to tell you about the parts I've chosen for the PC. So for the case, I've gone with the Inwin 101C in black. For the motherboard, I've gone for ASRock's B450 Steel Legend. This is a great looking motherboard. I've used it in a number of builds before and it runs really well. And importantly, it's Ryzen 3000 series ready, which is important because I've gone for the Ryzen 5 3600 for the CPU. Keeping that CPU cool, I've gone with an air cooler from Cooler Master. It's their Hyper 212 Black Edition. So this CPU cooler comes with one fan included, but they also enclose an additional bracket and splitter cable, allowing you to add a second fan for increased performance. So I do have a spare fan sitting about, so I'm going to add a second fan in for this build. Importantly, if you want to save yourself some money, you don't need to buy a separate CPU cooler because the Ryzen 5 comes with a CPU cooler included, although it's not going to perform as well as this one that I have got from Cooler Master. So because I've got an Inwin case, I've also gone with some case fans from Inwin. So they are the Polaris RGB case fans. And this case can hold a maximum of 6 fans, and that's exactly what I've got for this build. For the RAM, I've got 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro in black at 3200 megahertz speed. For storage, I've only got one drive for this build. It's a 1 terabyte NVMe M.2 SSD by Sabrent. Again, if you want to save yourself a bit of money, you can buy a slightly lower capacity drive if you don't need all that storage. But you're probably not going to save yourself that much money switching to a SATA SSD because at the moment these drives are just so well priced. Powering the whole build, I've got a 550 watt semi-modular gold power supply from Corsair. And then the last couple of items I have again are optional, but they will improve the aesthetics of your build. And that is some black and white cable extensions for the power supply. These come from a number of different sources. I've got 2 black and white cables left over from a previous build by CableMod. The only cable I don't have that I'll need for this build is the 24-pin cable. So I managed to pick up a black and white cable extension off Amazon. It's by a company, Shack Mods. I've never used them before, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it performs next to the tried and tested cables by CableMod. Okay, so that's all the parts. Let's get on with the build. Okay, so we're going to make a start with the motherboard, and it's a good idea to install as many of the parts as you can in the motherboard before you put it into the case, because installation is much easier on a flat table than it is working in the case itself. So we're going to go ahead and install the CPU cooler, the RAM, and the M.2 SSD, all before we put the motherboard into the case. So we're going to start off with the CPU, and it goes into this socket in the center of the motherboard. Okay, so to prepare the CPU socket for the CPU, we just need to open this little lever by pulling it across all the way to the right hand side. Okay, so this is our CPU, and what you'll notice is I'm holding it by the sides, and the reason for that is I don't want to damage these gold pins that are on the bottom of the CPU. The other thing, when you look at the bottom, you'll notice that the corner of the CPU, the top left hand side, has a little gold triangle on it, and none of the other corners have that triangle. Now this is important because this is going to help us orientate the CPU in the socket in the right way round. And again, if you look at the top of the CPU, there's also a little gold triangle on now the bottom left hand side, and that's the same side that has the triangle underneath. Okay, if we look closely at the CPU socket itself, what you'll notice in the top left hand corner, there's a little triangle on the socket itself, and this is designed to help you orientate the CPU in the socket. So the gold triangle on the CPU needs to line up with this little triangle on the CPU socket. Okay, so I'm now going to install the CPU in the socket. I've got my little gold triangle here, and I'm going to line this up with the triangle on the motherboard. So all I want to do is lower the CPU into the socket and let it fall into place. It's really important I don't go pushing down on the CPU because I can actually bend the pins and damage them. So I'm just going to let it hover into place here, and what we'll notice is when it's in the right place, it's just going to fall into the socket like it has done now. Importantly, I'm not going to go pressing down on the CPU where I can risk damaging the pins. The only additional thing I need to do is close the lever to lock the CPU in place. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is install the RAM, and the RAM is going to go into these sockets here. So what you'll notice is there's 4 sockets on the motherboard, but the kitted RAM that we have bought only has 2 sticks of RAM in it. So it's important we don't just pick and choose which sockets we're going to install the RAM into because it won't run at the fastest speed that way. So every motherboard has guidance in its manual on which sockets to occupy first if you've only got 2 sticks of RAM to get the fastest speeds out of it. So for us, it's this 2nd and 4th socket along from the CPU that we should be installing into. And in fact, for most motherboards, these are the 2 sockets that are recommended. So to prepare the sockets to receive the RAM, all we need to do is pull this little clip back here and here in the sockets that we're going to install into. Okay, so this is the RAM, and what you'll notice is there's gold connectors at the bottom with a little notch in the middle. And what you'll notice is that notch isn't in exactly the middle of the RAM. The little gold connector on the right hand side is slightly longer than the one on the left hand side, and that's going to be important when we're lining the RAM up in the socket because it's only going to go in one way round. Okay, so to install the RAM, all we need to do is line the RAM up with the slots on the socket we're going to go into, and then we just want to push firmly down on the top and it'll make a click as it locks into place. And we just repeat the same process with the 2nd stick of RAM, line it up with the socket, and then push firmly down on the top to lock into place. And we've now installed the RAM. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is install our M.2 SSD. So this motherboard has 2 M.2 SSD sockets. So we've got this one at the top behind the heatsink, and there's one down here at the bottom of the motherboard. Now these 2 sockets aren't created equally. The one at the top will run at faster speeds than the one at the bottom. And as we've only got one M.2 SSD, we're going to install it in this top socket to take advantage of those faster speeds. The other thing you'll notice is the socket at the top has a heatsink on it, which is going to be useful to help keep our SSD cool when it's running. So the first thing we need to do is remove the heatsink to get access to the socket. Okay, so we just need to remove the 2 screws. There's one on each side. And then we should just be able to lift the heatsink off. Okay, so this is our M.2 SSD. You'll notice over the right hand side you've got the little connectors that plug into the motherboard, and over the left hand side there's place for a little screw to secure it home. So the first thing we want to do is check this little standoff is in the right place. You'll notice there's little places here where the standoff can go, and we may need to move it depending on the length of our M.2 SSD drive. So if we just line it up, you'll actually notice that the standoff is in the right place. So that's good, we don't need to adjust that. Okay, so to insert the drive, all we need to do is insert it at a slight angle into the socket, and then whenever we install the heatsink, it's going to hold the drive in place. Okay, before we put the heatsink back on, it's important we remove this plastic protection. Okay, so we line the heatsink up with the holes, and then it's just a matter of screwing things back down again. Okay, so that's the M.2 SSD installed. Okay, so the next thing to do is install the CPU cooler. So I've got this Hyper 212 Black from Cooler Master, and I've gone with this over the stock cooler because one, I think it looks better, and two, it's going to give increased cooling performance under load. Again, this is an option. If you don't want to spend the extra money on a CPU cooler, you can of course install the stock cooler which comes with your CPU. So I'm going to show you how to install both today, starting off with the stock cooler. Okay, so regardless of which CPU cooler we're going to use, the first thing we're going to need to do is remove these clips from the motherboard. They're held on with 4 screws, so we just need to take these off. Okay, so it's important you don't throw these little clips and screws away because you may need them for a future build. So the best place to keep them is in a little bag in your motherboard box. Okay, so now we've got the clips and screws removed, you can see the little back plate protruding through the 4 holes in the motherboard. If I lift the motherboard up and out of the way, you'll see the back plate there. So we need to keep this back plate in for the stock CPU install. Okay, so this is the stock AMD CPU cooler. So it's basically just a fan on top of a heatsink, and then there's 4 screws to secure it to the motherboard. What's important to note is there's thermal paste pre-applied to the bottom of the cooler. So 1, be careful you don't touch this, and 2, make sure you don't add more thermal paste to your CPU prior to installation. Okay, so to install the CPU cooler, all we need to do is line up the screws with the socket on the back plate. And the first thing we want to do is get each of the screws threaded into the back plate. So it's going to give that a few turns till it clicks into place. And importantly, when you're screwing these on, you want to go for opposite corners. So I'm now going to go over to the opposite corner just to get the screw to take. So that screw is now taken. I'm going to go over to here. And then over to here. So those screws have now all started to screw into the back plate. So now I'm going to screw them up gently, moving from corner to corner, because if I screw one all the way in, it'll put too much pressure on one side of the CPU. So a couple of turns of this one, a couple of turns over here, a couple of turns here, and then over here, and just repeat that process. And then again, the screws will stop once they're all the way screwed in. Okay, so that's everything screwed all the way in. So the only additional thing we need to do is to plug this cable into the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Okay, so this is the CPU fan header on the top right-hand corner of the motherboard. So all we need to do is plug the cable in, and what you'll notice this side of the cable, there's a little notch which lines up with the notch on this side of the socket. So it's just a matter of lining these up and pushing down to secure the cable. Last thing we want to do is just tuck the cable in out of the way. Okay, so that's the stock AMD CPU cooler installed, and unless you're planning on overclocking your CPU, it's probably going to do an adequate job performance-wise and will save you a bit of money. As I've mentioned, the Cooler Master CPU will do a much better job at cooling the CPU, but it also, in my opinion, looks much better. So that's why I've paid a little bit of extra money for it. So I'm now going to show you how to install it. Okay, so this is our Cooler Master CPU cooler, and as you can see, size-wise, it's quite an upgrade from the stock cooler. Now it comes with the one fan installed, and as I've mentioned before, it does come with two little brackets to allow you to add another fan to the other side, and also a fan splitter cable. So you can plug this one end into your CPU fan header socket, and then this allows you to put two fans in the other end. Now I do have an additional black fan, so I'm going to add this on to the other side to increase the performance of the cooler. Now before we come on to install this, the first thing we need to do is prepare the motherboard to receive the cooler. Now remember how we removed the little clips and screws with the stock cooler? We need to do the same, but this time we need to remove the back plate as well, because there's a separate back plate that we're going to have to build up that comes with this cooler. Okay, so the first part of preparing the motherboard for the CPU cooler is exactly the same as with the stock AMD cooler. We need to remove the black clips and screws from the front of the motherboard, which we've already done. This time as well, we also want to remove the back plate as well, because the Cooler Master cooler comes with its own back plate, which we're going to need to install. So importantly, don't throw this out. Again, put it with your other screws and clips in your motherboard box, because if you come to sell your motherboard in the future when you upgrade, you're going to need this when you sell it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is to prepare the back plate for the back of the motherboard. What's really important is this cooler is designed to be used on a whole range of motherboards across AMD and Intel. So you need to read the instructions and get the parts out of the box that are designed for your particular motherboard socket. So we've got an AM4 socket, so I've got the bits here that I need to install this on the AM4 socket. Okay, so this is the motherboard backplate, and what you'll notice on one side it says Intel, on the other side it says AMD. So we've got the AMD motherboard, so we're going to install these little metal clips on this side. So they go into this larger section here. They're going to lock into place, and then we're going to secure them with this little clip over the top. And that just clips into place. And we just need to repeat that process for the other three sockets. Okay, so that's the little backplate prepared, and what you'll notice is a little bit of movement in each of these clips, so that's hopefully going to get them into a position where they're going to be able to slide into the back of our motherboard. Okay, so we've got the backplate finished, so we just need to pop it in behind the motherboard. And there is a little bit of adjustment in each of these little clips if it doesn't fit, so that goes in nicely. Maybe just lower it down again. So next we just need to screw these on, and our cooler is actually then going to screw on to these as well. So just hand tighten them. Okay, so now our back plate is secured at the back of the motherboard. Okay, so we're now ready to install the Cooler Master heatsink onto the motherboard. Now, a couple of things that are important about this. One, when we put it on, we want the Cooler Master logo to be going the right way, so this should read from top to bottom. So we don't want to put it this way, or it's going to be upside down. Next thing, if we look at the bottom of the heatsink, what you'll notice is that there's no thermal paste this time applied here. So we're going to have to apply some thermal paste to the CPU before we install this. Okay, so to install the thermal paste, all we want to do is put a pea-sized amount into the middle of the CPU. And then when we apply the heatsink, it's going to spread this all over the CPU. Okay, so the next thing to do then is to install the heatsink onto the motherboard. And again, it's just a matter of lining up the 4 screws. And we've made sure the Cooler Master logo is up the right way. And then we just want to repeat the process of screwing this in again, going for the diagonals. So we'll just get the screws to take as the first thing. Okay, and now that all 4 screws have taken, we're just going to tighten them at the diagonals a little bit for each screw, so we're not applying too much pressure on any one side of the CPU at any time. And then again, we're just making sure we don't over tighten this. Just when this stops for the first time, we're going to stop screwing in. Okay, so that's the heatsink on. Okay, so before we come on to put the fans on the heatsink, it's important to talk about the direction of flow through the fans. So importantly, all fans are going to have a front and a back, and air flows in from the front and out the back of the fan. So this is the front of the fan. And the back of the fan, you can see it's got these little extra bits of plastic, and you can see the wire coming out. So air is going to be drawn in through the front of this fan and out the back. So it's important when we're installing this on the case anywhere, as case fans are on a heatsink or a radiator, that we have the fan installed the right way round, so it's going to blow air through either into the case or through the heatsink in a way that we want it to. So with the heatsink here, we want it to blow air from right to left through the heatsink, because in our case there's going to be a little fan here that's going to exhaust the hot air out the back of the case. So whenever we install this onto the heatsink, we're going to want to have the front of the fan round this way, so it's blowing air through the heatsink. When we come to install the other fan on the heatsink, we want to have it in the same orientation, because we want it pulling air through the heatsink and then exhausting it out the back of the case. And the back of the case is going to be here. What a lot of people who are starting off to build a PC will install the fan the same way round. And all that's doing is it's blowing air, there's no airflow actually going through, it's blowing air in one way and in the other way. And you're going to wonder then why your CPU temperatures are incredibly high. So it's really important you pay attention to the orientation you're installing your fans in. The other thing to be careful when you're installing your fans is there's a wire that obviously comes out of each of the fans. So you don't want to have this wire coming out the front where you can see it. In general, you want to have this towards the back of the case where it's going to be hidden from sight. Okay, we're ready to install the fans on the heatsink, and to make things easier, I'm just going to plug the little splitter cable in first. So I'm just going to route the cable in underneath the heatsink and then plug it in underneath. It's important to always think about how you're routing your cables, and I don't want these to be on show afterwards. So that's that fan plugged in, making sure the orientation is round the right way. And then I'm just going to plug these little clips. So these little clips are going to go, there's little holes in the fans they're going to slide into. So they're in there, and that just pulls and locks into place on that side. And then we just need to repeat the process on the back. Okay, so that's the front fan installed, and it's going to be blowing air through the heatsink. So it's now just time to plug the back fan on. I'm just going to wrap some of this cable around the heatsink. Okay, so we're now just going to install the back fan on. And it's just the same process of putting the little brackets in and locking them into place. And the same process then on the back. Okay, so this is the CPU fan header socket, so we're just going to route the cable over to it. And plug it in. And then we'll just tidy the cable up by pushing the ends down. So as you can see, that's everything looking nice and tidy. All the cables are routed nicely behind the heatsink and out of the way. And we've got the fans in the right orientation, so air is going to come through here, through the heatsink, and then this fan is going to help pull it out the back. And there's going to be another fan here, which is going to then exhaust it out the back of the case. So we're now ready to put the motherboard into the case. Okay, to prepare the case for building, we want to remove any panels or fan grills that are going to get in our way during the build. So this front panel, there's two little clips here. They just pull them out and then we're able to lift the front glass panel off. There's a little fan grill in here at the bottom, so we just reach in and pull, it'll come out. And to remove the back of the case, we just need to unscrew these thumb screws. And then it'll lift out, just like the front. Okay, so before we install the motherboard into the case, it's important we install the motherboard I/O shield into the case. So make sure you get it in the right orientation. If you're not sure, have a look at the ports in the back of the motherboard and make sure they're going to line up. We can see the text is up this way, so it's going to go this way round. To install this, all you want to do is put it into the slot at the back of the case and then just apply pressure, and it's going to click when it gets into place. Okay, so the motherboard has 9 little holes in it in 3 rows, 3 at the top, 3 at the middle and 3 at the bottom. And at the back of the case there's little standoffs, you can see them here sticking out. So it's important to make sure the standoffs are in the right place with your motherboard so that whenever you put the motherboard up, they're going to line up with the holes in the motherboard. If not, you can see there's additional holes where you can adjust the standoffs. Okay, so we'll just check our motherboard. And line it up. Yep, and I can see all the holes look in the right place. So I'm just lining the motherboard up with the I/O shield and holding it in place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to screw the screws that come with your case in to secure the motherboard in place. Okay, so the next thing I like to do is plug any cables into the motherboard that we can at this stage. And the reason for doing that is if we go ahead and install fans down the bottom, we're going to block all the ports at the bottom of the motherboard, and it means plugging the cables in at a later stage is going to be much more difficult. And that's the reason I like to do it at this stage in a build. So the first thing we're going to do is plug in the case cables. Okay, so this collection of cables running from the I/O ports at the top of the case are the case cables. And obviously for these ports and the power switch on the front of the case to work, we're going to need to plug these cables into the motherboard. Okay, so before I start, I want to mention a little bit about cable management. Cable management is something most people think you do at the end of a build, but it's actually really important you pay attention to it as you go along. So you want to route the cables through the case at the best cutout. so that it comes as close to where you're going to plug it into on the motherboard, so as little as the cable is showing at the front of the case. Now this isn't the best case when it comes to cable management because most of the cutouts are actually over to the side of the motherboard. Other motherboards will have cutouts in underneath where you're able to route cables, but as you can see here, there's no real cables above or below and they're all over to the side. So there's going to be a little bit more cable on display than you would have with another case. So the first cable we're going to plug in is the HD audio cable for the mic and headphone jack at the front. And in general, that is always at the bottom left-hand side of the motherboard. So we're going to route it in down the bottom here through this little gap and run it over to where it plugs in at the front. Okay, so that's the port we're going to plug into, making sure we've got it round in the right orientation, and it's just going to push into place. There we go, so that's the HD audio installed. Okay, next up is the USB 3 header, so that's it here, and we're going to route the cable then through here, and you'll notice the cable has a little notch on it here, and there's also a little cutout for it on the motherboard. We'll just get things around the right way. And these pins in particular, you have to be really careful plugging them in. Again, you don't want to bend these pins, so make sure you've got it installed right before you push on the cable. And that's it, locked into place. So our case also comes with a USB-C cable for the USB-C port on the top of the case. Unfortunately, this motherboard doesn't have a header, so we're not going to be able to plug this cable in. Okay, so the next cable to plug in is the 12 volt standard RGB cable that lets you control the lights at the front of the case with the motherboard. Now importantly, there's two different types of RGB headers on motherboards, and this motherboard has both. So over to the left hand side of the case, we've got the 12 volt 4-pin RGB header, and further down at the right and the bottom, we've got the 5 volt 3-pin addressable RGB header. And it's really important you plug the right cable into the right place, otherwise you can really damage your hardware. So we've got the 12 volt 4-pin cable, so we're going to need to plug it into this header here. Now one of the nice things about this cable is it comes with a little splitter on it. So you can see you've got to plug this in, and then you've got an extra place you can plug further RGB cables into, which is a nice feature of the case given that our motherboard only has one 12 volt RGB header, and we're going to be needing this for to plug our fans into. So I'm just going to route this in from the back in through here. So the other really important thing is we need to install the 12 volt side of this on the correct way round. So the 12 volt pin is the one furthest to the left on this motherboard, so we're going to plug the cable in upside down so the 12 volt is all the way over to the left. So we just line it up and it just pushes into place. Okay, so the last two cables that we have to plug in are the HD LED and the power switch. So these tend to go down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. So again, we're going to route them through the bottom cutout. And quite often this is the most difficult cable to plug in. There's multiple pins, and the cables have to go the right way round. So it's important you have a check in your motherboard manual to make sure you're plugging the cables in the right way round. Okay, so the first cable we're going to plug in is the HD LED, and it's positive and negative. You can see on the back the positive is marked by a little arrow. So looking at these pins, the ones in the bottom row furthest to the left is the HD LED positive, and the one next to it is the negative. So we're going to plug this in with the text facing down the way. Okay, and the only other cable then we've got to plug in is the power switch, and it goes on the top row with the two cables furthest to the right hand side. Again, plugging it in with the text facing down. Okay, so the next thing we're going to need to do is install our case fans. So we've got 6 of these in-wind fans to go into the case, and the case has 6 places for fans. So you can install 3 down the bottom, one at the rear and 2 on the side. So we've already talked when we installed the heatsink on the CPU about direction of flow through fans. So this is the front side of the fan, and the rear of the fan is the side with these little black bits of plastic. So air is going to come in from the front and out the rear of the fan. So it's important we install these in the right orientation. So in general, with cases, your intake is going to have a filter on it because you don't want dust to come into your case. But your exhaust isn't going to have a filter on it because the filter, all it would do was limit airflow, and you're not going to suck air in as you're going to be exhausting air out. So the case gives you a bit of a clue here. At the bottom, you've got a dust filter for the 3 fans along the bottom. So that's a clue that you probably should be using that as your input. And again, that makes sense because the graphics card is going to require air from here. And then we're going to install the other 3 fans as exhaust. So hopefully things are going to be balanced in the case. 3 fans bringing air in, 3 fans taking air away. These in-wind fans are actually quite unique. Most RGB fans come with 2 little cables coming out of them. So there's one cable for power to the fan and the other cable to control the RGB. All these in-wind fans they have 2 little connectors, one here and one here, and the idea is that you daisy chain these fans. So your first fan, you plug a cable in, and the cable has one end goes to one of the chassis fan headers on your motherboard to control the fan's power and speed, and the other end you plug into the 12-volt RGB connector on the motherboard to control the lighting for the fans. Then when you want to connect any other fans, all you need to do is run either a short or a long connecting cable from the other port to the next fan. And then you can repeat that series for whatever number of fans you want to install in the case. So the other important thing to remember when plugging these fans in is remember to leave the connectors at the back. You don't want to see the wires coming out from the fans. So in general, they're better at the back. I like to quite often to set the fans out, plug the wires in before you end up screwing them in, because plugging wires in afterwards can be that wee bit more difficult. So we're going to want 3 fans along the bottom of the case as intakes, so they're going to have to go upside down with the back of the fan at the top. And again, we want these little connectors at the back, so we're going to lay them out this way around. We're then going to want these 2 fans on the back here, and again it makes sense, they're going to go the correct way around, so the front is facing us, so it's going to exhaust air out the back of the case. And again, we want these cables out of the way, so we're going to have one here, and then we're going to have another one sitting on top of it over here. Then the last fan we're going to have is going to exhaust air out the back of the case, so it's going to be sitting around this orientation over here. And you can imagine if we had screwed this in, there's no way we're going to be able to plug the cables in now because they're all hitting at the back. So again, it makes sense to get all the cables plugged in at the start. Okay, so we'll make a start of plugging the cables in. So we're going to start with this rear exhaust fan. So this cable is the one that's going to plug into the fan header on the motherboard and also to the RGB. And then this cable here is going to plug into the next fan along in the daisy chain. So we're going to route these cables around the top of the case, and there's a little cutout at the top we can take them out. So it makes sense to bring them out here. Now we've got the cables running out the back of the case, we can go ahead and screw this fan in. So there's 4 little screws at the back to hold it in place. Again, with most fans, you don't want to over tighten the screws. You want them just tight enough till they start stopping turning. Okay, so that's everything screwed in place and the fan's spinning nice and freely. So the next thing we want to do is plug those cables in. So I'm just going to bring these out down the bottom slot in the motherboard. And we've got, first of all, the RGB connector. So that's going to plug into the little extra adapter we had from the case fan. So we need to line up the two 12 volts together. So we turn this around this way, that's the two 12 volts connected, and push into place. Okay, next up we've got the power for the fans. So there's 3 chassis fan headers on this motherboard. There's 2 down the bottom here, and then there's 1 up the side of the CPU cutter. So it makes sense again we plug this into one of the ones down the bottom. Okay, so that's this fan plugged into RGB and also to power. So the next thing we're going to need to do is plug the little extra cable into the next fan for the daisy chain. So it makes sense to plug into the one at the top next, and the one at the top is then going to plug into the one below. So we're going to take one of the little short connectors and plug it into here. So it's going to allow us to plug into the one below, and then we're going to plug the longer connector coming from this fan into here and screw the fan into place. Okay, so that's ready then to be screwed into place. Okay, so that's that one secured. Next thing, we want to connect this cable to the fan below, but before we do, we want to make sure we have an extra wire plugged in to let us to get to the fan below that. So we add the little extra extended wire in, and then we're going to plug this wire in from the fan above. There we go, and then screw this into place. To install the bottom 3 fans, we're going to need to turn the case on its side so we can get access at the bottom, but it makes sense to get all the wires plugged in before we turn it over. Okay, so we now go ahead and slide the bottom dust filter into place. Okay, so the next thing to install is the power supply, and this is what we call a semi-modular power supply, in that some of the cables are plugged in and we've got spaces to plug any additional cables that we're going to need to plug in. You get some power supplies which are fully modular, so all the cables need to be plugged in. And there's other power supplies that aren't modular at all, so basically all your cables are plugged in. The advantage of modular and semi-modular is that you only need to plug the cables in that you're going to need. So you're not going to have lots of unnecessary cables at the back of your case taking up space. So looking at the cables that are plugged in, we've got our 24-pin power supply for the motherboard. And we've also got an 8-pin CPU cable for the motherboard. The additional cables, they've supplied some Molex, SATA and PCIe cables. So the only additional one that we're going to need to plug in is actually the PCIe cable. We don't have anything that needs SATA power or Molex power, and things that need that are SATA hard drives. They need the power to power the drives, and some RGB controllers in the cases will need these. So the advantage for us is that we're not going to have these additional cables at the back of our case taking up unnecessary space. Okay, and one of the things you'll notice when you look at all the cables, they're labelled. So this one's labelled CPU, this is labelled PCIe, so you're not going to get them mixed up. So this is going to plug in down here, and that's our power supply ready to go. So remember I'd mentioned that I had bought some cable extensions. Again, this is an option. If you don't want to use the cable extensions, you can plug this straight into your graphics card and these two cables straight into your motherboard. But I've got some black and white cable extensions which I'm now going to add to these because that's going to improve the look of our build. Okay, so this one's going to plug into our 24-pin cable. Let's see, so we'll join those up. And that's locked into place. Next one is the one for the CPU. And the problem is this one for the graphics card and the one for the CPU look fairly similar. How you can tell them apart if they're not labelled is the CPUs are often 8-pin plus 4-pin. So this cable splits into 2 4s, so it's likely to be for the CPU. Whereas the ones that go into the graphics card, they will split into 6 and 2-pin connectors. So this is an 8-pin cable, so it doesn't split at all. So I know this one is for my graphics card. So I'm going to plug it into the one for the PCIe. And you see this one here, it's a 6 plus a 2. So I join them together, and then we're just going to plug it into the end of here. So our graphics card is only going to require one 8-pin connector, so we're not going to need this additional one. If your graphics card required more connectors, you could just plug additional extensions into here. And the final one is for the CPU, and again, let's see how this one splits. It doesn't split, it's just one 8-pin, but a lot of these cables will split into 4 as well. So we'll join it up. Okay, so that's our power supply ready to go, and I would recommend you plug all the cables in before you install the power supply. It's like most things, they're much easier to plug in now than when the power supply is in the case. Okay, so our power supply is going to go into this space at the top of the case. So importantly to note, there's a hole facing down into the case, and the power supply has an intake fan. So we're going to need to install the power supply with the fan facing down the way so it can get air. Obviously, if we install it the wrong way, the fan's going to be up against a hard panel at the top of the case, and the power supply is not going to get the air it needs to keep cool. So we're just going to slide it into here. And then we just need to secure it at the back with 4 screws. Okay, the next thing to do is to plug the power supply cables into the motherboard. So we're going to plug our 24-pin connector, which goes into here, and then we're going to bring it out through this cutout here so that it's nice and close to where it's going to plug into. So what you'll notice, there's a little clip here on this side of the power cable and a little connector here. So it's important you line these up when you're plugging them in, and you'll not plug the cables in the wrong way around them, or not try to plug them in the wrong way around. Okay, a little click just as that locks into place. And then we're going to feed the excess cable out the back, and we've got these little cable cones that are going to help organise the cable and keep the cables looking nice and neat. Okay, the next cable is the CPU power cable, which is going to plug in here on the motherboard. Okay, so the last part to install is the graphics card, and we're going to install the graphics card in this top long PCIe slot. It's going to give us the fastest speeds. The one below that would also be large enough to take the graphics card, if we install it here, the speeds are going to be slower. So to install it, we just need to open the clip by pushing this little bracket back, and then we're going to need to remove 2 of these brackets at the side, and it's normally the second and the third one that we're going to need to remove because we've got a dual slot graphics card. So to remove them, we just need to put the screwdriver in here, unscrew this, then will just fall out of place, and the one below as well. So all we need to do is line the graphics card up with the slot. And then we're just going to push it into place, and there should be a click as it locks. There we go, there was a little click. And then we just need to re-secure the screws that we removed earlier on. And then we just need to plug in the 8-pin power cable. Okay, so the last thing to do is to finish off the cable management. So we're just going to have to tidy up all these cables. There's plenty of places we can cable tie them down, and lots of space up here beside the power supply for any additional cabling. So we'll get the back tidied up. Okay, so the PC is built, and now we come to the moment of truth. We've got to switch it on and see does it boot. Before I do that, I've got to plug in my Windows 10 bootable USB drive. If you don't know how to make one of these, I'll put a link to it in the description. So let's plug this in. Okay, that's it plugged in. We're going to press the power switch. And we've got lights on the motherboard, which is a good sign. Now to press the power button on the front, and we'll see what happens. Okay, that's an even better sign. So we've got all the fans firing up, the memory's lighting up. And now all we need to see is the Windows boot screen appearing on the monitor. Okay, so we've got the ASRock logo, which again is a good sign. Now we've got the spinning wheel down the bottom. Hopefully we're going to see the Windows boot screen. So that's great. So Windows is now loaded off the USB drive, and we need to then go on ahead and install Windows. So again, I'm going to be running you through how to do this step by step. What I'm now going to do is move the camera around and give you a view of just the screen. Okay, so I'm now going to run you through the steps to installing Windows 10. So we've got English United Kingdom, English United Kingdom, and United Kingdom. So we can hit next. And we're going to hit install now. We have a product key, so we're going to put it in here now. Okay, so we're going to accept the license terms and hit next. And what we want to do is a custom install. And we can see our drive, it's our 1 terabyte drive. So that's where we're going to install Windows. So we're going to hit next. And then we just have to let Windows run through all the steps it's going to need to do. Okay, so we're in the United Kingdom, we're going to hit yes. And its keyboard is also United Kingdom. And we're going to skip the additional keyboard. So we're going to set Windows up for personal use. And then if you have a Microsoft login, you can put it in now. Okay, set up a PIN code. And we're going to hit no. We're going to go do this later. Only save files to this PC, and we're going to hit no, we don't want a free trial of Office 365. We're going to decline the digital assistant. We're not going to use online speech recognition. We don't want location tracking. No, we don't want to find the device. We're just going to send basic diagnostics. No to inking. No again. No again. Okay, so that's Windows installed. The next thing we want to do is install all the updates to Windows before we go on and do anything else. So we go down to here, go to Settings and Update and Security. And we're going to go check for updates. And what we're going to do is we're going to let Windows install all the updates it needs. It's going to turn off and on a number of times, but we're not going to install any other programs until Windows has installed all the updates and we're running the latest version of Windows and there's no more updates available. Okay, so Windows is now completely up to date. So now we're going to go and get the drivers that we need. So we'll type AMD drivers page here. So we're going to set on graphics. We have a 5500 series graphics card and it's the 5500 XT. So we're going to hit submit. We've got Windows 10 64-bit. So we're going to download. And we're going to hit run. And we'll just wait for the software to download. Okay, so we're going to go yes. Install. And then we're going to click install. And the flickering of the display there is just the drivers being installed, so the display should come back on in a minute. Okay, we're going to click finished. So that's us, we've got the drivers installed, and if we check for updates, we've now got the latest version installed. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is head over to the motherboard website, and then we're going to go to support at the top and type in Steel Legend. So it's going to bring up the B450 Steel Legend, and if we head over to download, it's going to give us a list of the drivers that we're going to need to install. So Windows will have found most of these drivers, but if there's any additional drivers that you want to install, you can download them from here. So I'm going to download the ASRock Polychrome RGB because we're going to need it to change the colours of the motherboard and all the connected fans. So we click on Global, and we're going to click on Open, and we'll let that download. Click on the link. Next, next, install. So we're now able to go into the Polychrome, and we're going to be able to change any of the lighting on our motherboard and also any of the lighting of the fan or the RAM that's connected to it as well. Okay, so we're now able to go into here and we can adjust any of the components that we need to. So I'm going to skip through that. Okay, so again, you can install any of these additional drivers that you want to install from ASRock's page. Now the last thing I want to show you is how to change the RAM speed in the BIOS, because we've paid for 3200 megahertz RAM and I can almost guarantee it won't be running at that speed unless we manually change it. So to do that, we need to restart the computer, and then as the ASRock logo comes up at the start, if we press the delete key, that will take us into the BIOS. So we're going to go restart. So I just pressed the delete key just as the ASRock logo appeared, and then that should load up the BIOS for us. Okay, so looking at the BIOS, we've got the B450 Steel Legend running version 3.2 of the BIOS, which is the latest version, so there's no need to update this. It's got our Ryzen 5 3600. We have also got 16 gigabytes of RAM, but it's currently running at 2133 megahertz. So we need to bring that up to the full 3200 megahertz. So what we need to do is click on OC Tweaker, and we're going to go to DRAM frequency. It's set to auto at the moment, so we're going to click on that, and we're going to select 3200 megahertz. We're then going to go exit, and we're going to go to save changes and exit. Okay, so now when our computer loads up, the RAM will be running at the full speed. Okay, so that's the PC built. We've got Windows installed, we've got all the necessary drivers installed and running, and we've got the RAM updated to the correct speed. So hopefully you find this video useful. If you have, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you've got any questions for me, make sure you leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to be notified about future videos. Thanks for watching.
Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe